Imagine walking along the Nile 4,000 years ago. The air thick with the scent of mud and bread, children's laughter echoing through narrow streets, and the sun casting golden shadows over mud brick homes. Life seems ordinary, but behind every door, every ritual, and every whispered prayer lies a secret world of survival, faith, and mystery. Tonight, we're stepping inside that world. Before we drift into the daily lives of ancient Egyptians, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. We explore forgotten corners of history, stories so immersive they'll carry you into another time as you relax and unwind. Hit that bell so you don't miss a single journey into the past. Now, close your eyes, let your imagination float across the sands and along the banks of the Nile, and let's discover how people lived, worked, and dreamed in ancient Egypt. The day in ancient Egypt begins softly, almost imperceptibly, with the first blush of dawn spilling over the horizon and painting the sky in muted shades of gold and rose, touching the still waters of the Nile with a trembling light that seems to ripple across the land like a slow waking breath. Along the riverbanks, the early stirrings of life take shape quietly, without hurry or ceremony. Mud brick houses clustered close enough that the walls almost lean into one another, awaken with a gentle creak as families rise from woven mats and linen sheets, rubbing sleep from their eyes and stretching stiff limbs after long, cool nights on simple bedding. Outside, the smell of damp earth mingles with the faint tang of animal pens and the aroma of bread left overnight to rise in small clay ovens. And there is a soft, pervasive sense of expectation, the unspoken understanding that the day will demand labor, attention, and endurance. Children barefoot and tousle-haired wander through narrow alleys chasing small clay balls or playing rudimentary games with sticks and stones, their laughter carrying across courtyards and over rooftops, merging with the distant rhythmic calls of the riverbirds that wheel above the floodplain. Men, already awake, begin their day with preparation and ritual, sharpening sickles, checking the irrigation channels, adjusting the simple tools of their trade. Women, meanwhile, move with practiced efficiency, fetching water from the Nile in clay jars, kneading dough for the day's bread, grinding grains into coarse flour with heavy circular stones, and tending to small herb gardens where mint, coriander, and onions grow in tidy patches beside the house. The air is alive with subtle motion, with the low hum of early work blending seamlessly into the natural symphony of wind across papyrus reeds. The distant splash of fish leaping in shallow waters, and the gentle lapping of the river against mud banks. Even the animals seem to sense the rhythm of the day. Oxen stir and stretch, bleating softly, ready for ploughing. Ducks and geese waddle in tight flocks, calling to each other. Cats, sleek and alert, slink along walls and roof edges, stretching and yawning in preparation for their own small hunts. Life in this moment is both ordinary and miraculous, a delicate balance between human effort and the natural world. And though there is no overt fanfare, there is a quiet reverence to the way Egyptians move through their morning. Every action, from the way a mother places a tiny offering of bread at the household shrine, to the way a farmer inspects the furrows for moisture, carries a subtle acknowledgement of forces larger than themselves: the sun that rises predictably every morning, the river that brings life and death in its seasonal floods, and the gods whose favor seems both distant and intimately present. Even in these first few hours, you can see the layers of society and survival intertwined. A scribe may rise later, scribes in hand, while the lowliest worker bends to mud and soil. But all shared the same horizon, the same rising sun, the same quiet hope that today will yield enough bread, enough water, enough safety. As light climbs higher, shadows retreat, and the village comes alive in earnest. Conversations begin to murmur across walls. The clatter of pottery on stone surfaces mixes with the bark of dogs and the cries of merchants preparing for the market. And the river, ever patient, reflects the brilliance of the sun in a shimmer of molten gold. There is a rhythm here, almost meditative, in which every heartbeat, every step, every breath seems tuned to the eternal pulse of the Nile. and it is impossible not to feel that even in the simplest life-tending crops, feeding animals, drawing water, baking bread, there exists a profound connection to time, nature, and the enduring spirit of human endeavor. Ancient Egyptians are acutely aware of mortality, of scarcity, and of the delicate line between life and famine. Yet the dawn reminds them that survival is always within reach, that the river will return, the sun will rise, and the next day will come with its promise of routine labor and small joys. In these early hours, one can imagine the quiet thoughts drifting through the minds of those who live here. A mother pondering the health of her children, a farmer considering the fertility of his fields, a child imagining adventures far beyond the riverbanks. And above it all, the sun continues its steady climb, unhurried, unyielding, a silent witness to every minor victory and quiet despair, a daily reminder of the rhythm of life that will continue for centuries in this ancient land, shaping the experiences, hopes, and fears of every soul that calls Egypt home. Here in these first fragile hours, life is both relentless and beautiful, a testament to human resilience and the simple, enduring routines that connect us across millennia to those who rose with the Nile and watched the sun cast its first golden light over mud, water, and stone. As the golden light of the Nile floods the village, spilling warmth over mud brick walls and narrow alleys, another layer of life quietly unfolds. One that is invisible to an outsider but central to every Egyptian household. The morning rituals and offerings that mark the beginning of each day. In almost every home, from the humblest hovel to the grandest estate, there is a small shrine tucked into a corner, or perhaps a simple shelf carved from the wall, dedicated to household gods and ancestral spirits, a space both sacred and intimate, often overlooked by casual visitors, but treated with a reverence that shapes the rhythm of daily life. Before any work begins, before bread is kneaded or water drawn, the family gathers, sometimes in silence, sometimes murmuring soft prayers, small tokens to these unseen powers. A piece of bread broken carefully into sections, a cup of water drawn from the Nile and poured reverently into a shallow bowl, incense lit from resin or aromatic wood smoke curling upwards in a lazy spiral, carrying whispered hopes into the unseen realms. Each gesture, each placement of an object is deliberate, learned from parents and elders, passed down through generations. It is not superstition alone. It is a way of asserting control over the unpredictable, of marking a small victory in the constant dance between human effort and forces beyond comprehension. Even children barely tall enough to reach the shelf participate, learning early the careful choreography of devotion. How to tilt the head, just so, how to clasp hands, how to speak a word or two softly, so as not to disturb the invisible presence, which might be angered by haste or neglect. Women often lead these rituals, moving with a quiet authority that blends practicality and piety, arranging offerings with the precision of someone who understands that even a slight misplacement could invite misfortune. Men, if present, may bow briefly, touching foreheads to the threshold, acknowledging both gods and ancestors, before leaving for the fields or workshops, while elders may recite brief hymns or invoke names of spirits that guard the household, threading familiar words into a tapestry of sound that seems older than memory itself. The aroma of burning incense mingles with the earthy smell of freshly kneaded dough and the metallic temps of water drawn from the river, creating a sensory landscape that defines the Egyptian morning. Tactile, fragrant, and alive with the invisible presence of the sacred. Offerings are not lavish. Most families cannot afford gold or spices, but every object matters. A loaf of bread, a small fish, or even a handful of dates represents an investment of care, an acknowledgement that nothing in life can be taken for granted. In wealthier homes, priests may be called to recite more elaborate chants, using papyrus scrolls or carved amulets to ensure that the family is favored by the gods, that illness or misfortune will be kept at bay. Temples large and imposing echo with the ritualized sound of voices chanting to Ra or Isis. But in the village, the effect is equally powerful, though quieter, more intimate, a constant reminder that the human and divine are never far apart. Each act, however small, is an affirmation that life, though unpredictable and fragile, is guided by rhythms, rules, and the enduring presence of unseen watchers. Even the simplest offerings carry layers of meaning. They honor the ancestors, remind the gods of the family's existence, and reinforce bonds within the household itself. Children learn not only piety, but patience, careful observation, and the sense that every gesture, no matter how small, resonates beyond the immediate moment. In these rituals, one sees the interweaving of survival and belief. Bread may feed the gods in symbol, but it nourishes humans in practice. Water poured into a bowl may honor spirits, yet also marks the start of a day of labor and sustenance. The sun continues its slow ascent, casting elongated shadows that stretch across courtyards and fields. Yet the shrine remains a focal point, a quiet constant that anchors the household to a rhythm older than the first brick. As families move through these motions, they are acutely aware of life's precariousness. Nile can flood or fail. Illness can strike without warning. Yet the ritual offers a measure of certainty, a small, tangible act of hope and resilience. Through offering bread, water, incense, or small trinkets, Egyptians affirm their presence in a world that is at once predictable and perilous. The rituals teach observation and care, noticing the texture of bread, the color of water, the direction in which incense smoke curls. The proper placement of objects, all actions that become second nature over years of repetition, blending into the very fabric of daily life. Even as family members drift to their work fields, workshops, or homes, they carry the quiet assurance that their morning homage has been noted, that the forces unseen have been addressed, that the balance between human effort and divine favor is momentarily, if not entirely, in their favor. Beyond individual households, the rhythm of these dawn rituals echoes through the village. Neighboring families lighting incense at similar times, children squealing as they navigate alleyways, women calling softly to one another, men preparing tools in time with the rising sun. There is a synchrony to this quiet chaos, a pattern that threads together community, faith, and survival in a seamless tapestry. The shrines, offerings, and whispered prayers are more than routine. They are the scaffolding of existence, an intricate and delicate system through which Egyptians navigate life, acknowledging uncertainty while asserting continuity. Even the poorest villager, with little more than mud, water, and bread, participates fully, learning that devotion is not measured in wealth, but in care, attention, and persistence. And as the sun climbs higher, flooding courtyards and alleyways with light, the smoke from incense trails lazily into the air, mingling with the morning scents of the river, and kitchens a silent testament to a people who understood that life's first quiet hours spent in ritual offering and reflection set the tone for everything that follows, weaving together faith, survival, and the subtle poetry of daily existence along the timeless banks of the Nile. In that golden light, one can imagine countless generations performing the same actions. Bowing, pouring, arranging, whispering, each act echoing the one before, creating a living thread that stretches from the dawn of Egypt to the present, connecting us to a world where human life was fragile, yet fortified by the invisible, enduring rituals that made each day possible. As the sun rises higher, spilling its steady light over the broad floodplains of the Nile, the farmers, arguably the backbone of ancient Egyptian civilization, begin the day's labor with a quiet determination that has persisted for generations, a rhythm that is at once exhausting, repetitive, and yet strangely meditative. Their work is inseparable from the river, whose seasonal flood dictates the very structure of life. When the waters recede, they reveal the fertile silt that will nourish their crops. But the timing is never entirely predictable, and a miscalculation can mean months of hunger. Men and women move in unison across the muddy fields, the soft squelch of soil between bare feet or sandals, a constant reminder that their lives are tied to the earth, that every seed sown and every furrow plowed carries consequences both immediate and far-reaching. Children, some barely able to lift a small hoe, follow along, learning through imitation, their small hands brushing the rich mud, their laughter punctuating the low hum of early labor. Oxen pull heavy wooden plows through furrows, the animals' muscles straining and bones creaking under the load, while farmers adjust the plow blades, angle the beams, and ensure that the rows are straight, precise, and ready for planting. The sun climbs, and the heat intensifies. Sweat drips from brows and trickles down backs, soaking linen tunics that cling uncomfortably to skin. Every movement is deliberate, honed by years of experience, yet fraught with small dangers. A misstep can twist an ankle, an overlooked furrow may flood or dry too quickly, and the work is unrelenting because nature does not pause for fatigue. The smell of mud mingles with the sweet tang of freshly cut reeds, the metallic scent of sharpened tools, and the occasional whiff of river water that splashes onto legs as oxen cross shallow channels. These fields are alive with activity beyond human effort. Birds flit overhead, swooping down to snatch insects. Frogs croak from the banks of irrigation ditches. Small fish flash in shallow pools, invisible to all but the keenest eye. The farmers, however, are not merely laborers, they are observers, intimately attuned to subtle changes. The texture of soil, the way water moves across the land, the color of emerging seedlings, the behavior of animals. Such observation is essential, for a single misreading of the land's signals can result in the ruin of a season's harvest, and in a society so dependent on agriculture, failure can ripple across villages, towns, and even the granaries of the Pharaoh. Women also toil in these fields, often carrying baskets of seed, scattering them evenly across the prepared soil, or moving along the irrigation channels, ensuring that water reaches every furrow. Their labor is no less arduous than that of the men. They bend, lift, and walk for hours under the unforgiving sun, yet their movements are practiced and precise. Their knowledge passed down through mothers, grandmothers, and elders who taught them the subtle differences between soil types, the signs of good germination, and the small rituals, perhaps a whispered prayer to the river god Hopi, that accompany planting and harvesting. Farming in ancient Egypt is far from a mechanical act. It is suffused with ritual and belief. For every seed sown is an appeal to the gods for favor, a quiet acknowledgement that survival depends not only on human effort, but on divine grace. Farmers speak little during work, and yet their cooperation is seamless. Without spoken commands, the rhythm of plowing, sowing, and watering proceeds as if orchestrated by a single mind, each person aware of their neighbor's movements and adjustments. Meals are taken in brief pauses, a piece of bread, a small serving of lentils, and sometimes beer brewed from barley, thick and sour, consumed to replenish energy. The cool liquid, both a comfort and a practical necessity. The sun climbs higher, and shadows shrink. Heat intensifies, and the river seems to shimmer in the mirage-like haze above the fields. Yet, even under these conditions, there is a certain beauty. The furrows stretch in straight, rhythmic lines. The plants glisten with dew or irrigation water, and the life of the land, the insects, birds, and amphibians persists alongside human labor. Work continues unbroken, punctuated by occasional laughter, brief conversations about markets or village news, and the shared understanding that every hour contributes to survival, to stability, to the continuation of life itself. The farmer's knowledge is detailed and sophisticated. They understand crop rotation, the timing of planting according to the Nile's flood, and even the effects of celestial patterns on growth, blending observation with inherited wisdom. They manipulate water channels with careful precision, digging small trenches, moving dikes, and adjusting flow to reach the furthest corners of their plots, all the while aware that too much or too little water can spell ruin. In this delicate balance, each person's skill and attentiveness is critical. By mid-afternoon, bodies are coated with mud and sweat, hands are raw from the constant friction of tools, and faces streaked with the dust of plowed earth. Yet there is an unspoken pride, a quiet satisfaction in seeing seedlings line up in perfect rows, the fields alive with promise. As work slows toward evening, Farmers return home with baskets of produce, fresh herbs, or fish from the river. Moving along narrow paths that wind between homes and fields, their hearts both weary and content. Children chase along the way, exhausted but exhilarated, while women prepare for the evening's meals, their hands nimble from a day of labor that spans both field and household. Evening offers a brief respite. Water is drawn to wash away the day's toil. Fires are lit for cooking, and families gather to share meals, recount small victories of the day, and plan for tomorrow's work. Yet the farmer's day is never truly over. Thoughts linger about irrigation, about the health of crops, about the unpredictable river and sun. For life in Egypt is always a negotiation between human effort and natural forces. There is a rhythm to it, a pattern that connects each generation to the last and the next, a continuity that has sustained civilization along the Nile for millennia. And as the sun dips low in the sky, painting the floodplain in molten gold, the farmers pause to look across their fields, feeling both the fatigue of labor and the quiet triumph of work done well, understanding that tomorrow the sun will rise again, the river will flow, and the cycle of sowing, tending, and harvesting will continue, just as it has for thousands of years, shaping not only the land but the people, their routines, their faith, and the very fabric of ancient Egyptian life. Once the morning labors have begun and the fields stretch with straight furrows under the high sun, life in the village unfolds, like a living tapestry woven from the routines, struggles, and small joys of countless households that cluster close together. Along narrow, dusty streets, separated by walls of sun-baked mud bricks, some cracked and weathered, others carefully repaired with mortar and fresh clay, their uneven surfaces telling stories of generations who have lived, worked, and rested within their shadows. Villages are compact, almost like small labyrinths, where every doorway opens onto the rhythms of daily life. The low hum of conversation, the clatter of cooking pots, the distant bleating of goats, or the braying of donkeys carrying goods from market. Here, children roam with freedom rarely granted in larger cities, their bare feet dusty, faces smeared with streaks of mud or soot, chasing one another through winding alleys, playing with crudely fashioned toy small dolls carved from clay, miniature boats of papyrus, or balls of twined fibers, learning social lessons as much from games as from adult instruction, negotiating turns, fairness, and hierarchy in the microcosm of the village. Women are at the heart of this domestic choreography, fetching water from nearby wells or the river, balancing large clay jars on their heads with astonishing poise, their hands busy with grinding grain into flour, using circular stones, kneading dough, preparing simple meals over open fires, and tending small gardens filled with onions, leeks, coriander, and mint herbs that flavor daily sustenance and serve as rudimentary medicine when ailments arise. Many women also act as informal healers, relying on knowledge passed down through generations, mixing poultices, brewing teas, or crafting charms to protect their families from illness or misfortune. Men, meanwhile, work in a variety of trades. Some repair tools, sharpen sickles, or construct simple wooden furniture. Others are skilled artisans, carving stone, weaving mats, or shaping clay vessels that will later hold grains, oils, or beer. Their labor is often communal, shared in collaboration with neighbors, and punctuated by the sounds of hammers on wood, scraping of chisels on stone, and the occasional burst of laughter or argument, the village alive with constant gentle noise that defines the texture of everyday existence. Meals are humble, yet central to social life. A shared loaf of bread, a few onions, perhaps a bit of lentils or fish caught from the Nile, prepared simply but with care, eaten on low benches or mats, and accompanied by conversation, storytelling, and the occasional teaching moment, as elders pass on knowledge about survival, faith, and village customs. Hygiene is rudimentary, but practiced with intention. Water from the Nile is used for washing hands and faces, and the weekly bath, when possible, is a ritual of refreshment, not only cleansing the body, but reaffirming order in a life where chaos through sickness, hunger, or the vagaries of the river is never far away. Villagers also navigate complex social networks. Marriages are arranged with attention to land, labor, and family ties. Disputes are settled by elders or local councils, and gossip flows as naturally as water through the irrigation channels, both a source of caution and entertainment. Religion is woven into every action. Small shrines decorate homes. Offerings of bread, water, or incense are made daily to household gods and spirits, and prayers accompany work, meals, and moments of reflection, underscoring the belief that life is governed not only by human effort, but by unseen forces that can bless or punish, protect or withdraw favor. Festivals punctuate the monotony of labor, offering moments of color, music, and communal joy. Processions wind through streets, musicians play simple reed flutes, children dance, and families come together to honor deities, mark the seasons, or celebrate local events, their excitement balanced by reverence and respect for tradition. Animals are an ever-present companion in village life. Goats, sheep, ducks, geese, and occasionally cattle move freely among homes and streets, their needs, adding to daily routines, while cats revered for their hunting prowess slip silently across walls and rooftops, protecting homes from rodents. Even the built environment itself reflects the interdependence of villagers. Narrow paths facilitate easy communication. Rooftops are used for drying grain or hanging laundry, and shared ovens or wells create opportunities for collaboration and gossip alike. The village is a world in miniature, with everyone playing a part, children observing, learning, and mimicking adults, women organizing and preparing sustenance, men laboring in fields, workshops, or communal projects, elders instructing, mediating, and preserving memory, and priests or scribes if present, bridging the tangible world and the spiritual or administrative realm. Despite the simplicity of the structures and the limitations of material wealth, the village is vibrant, alive with social and spiritual life, resilient in the face of uncertainty, and organized around routines that make survival possible, while allowing moments of connection, celebration, and reflection. Even minor events, a mislaid basket, a sudden flood from an irrigation ditch, a child's cry, ripple across the village, demanding attention, adaptability, and cooperation, reminding all that life is fragile and interwoven, each individual a part of a living network. The pace of life is measured, not by clocks, but by the sun's journey across the sky, by the ebb and flow of the river, and by the cycles of planting and harvesting that define opportunity and risk. In the quiet evenings, as the sun sets behind distant palms and mud brick homes, villagers gather around small fires to share meals, recount stories, and reflect on the day's work, their voices soft against the gentle chorus of night insects, distant barking dogs, and the whispering of reeds along the Nile. It is in these moments that the rhythm of the village becomes most apparent. Labor and leisure, faith and superstition, family and community, all intertwined in an enduring dance that has persisted for centuries, connecting every individual to their neighbors, to the river, and to the enduring traditions of a civilization that values continuity, resilience, and the subtle poetry of everyday life. The village, humble and sun-warmed, is both a shelter and a stage, a place where human stories unfold in quiet repetition, where life is at once ordinary and profound, and where the ordinary acts of carrying water, tending gardens, preparing meals, and honoring the unseen forces create a sense of purpose, identity, and belonging that anchors each resident to the rhythms of the land, the river, and the long, unbroken thread of history itself. Even in the quietest village tucked along the fertile banks of the Nile, the presence of the Pharaoh is never far from the minds of Egyptians, looming as both a distant authority and a constant influence over daily life. The Pharaoh is more than a ruler. He is a god walking among humans, an embodiment of matter, balance, order, and justice that underpins the universe, and every individual from farmer to scribe feels the weight of his unseen hand in countless subtle ways. Taxes, levies, and labor, the mandatory service to state projects like building canals, temples, or royal tombs extend into the farthest corners of the countryside. And even when the villagers go about their simplest routines of fetching water or grinding grain, the shadow of the throne stretches invisibly over their shoulders. Farmers tending the fields that feed not only their families but also the city know that a portion of their harvest will be collected to maintain the state, to support priests, soldiers, and officials, or to fund the extravagant monuments that honor gods and kings alike. These duties can be burdensome, but they are accepted as part of life, inseparable from the understanding that the Pharaoh is the guarantor of the land's fertility and the river's annual gifts. Even those who have never seen him in person, most villagers never do know the precise rituals required to show loyalty and respect, whether in offerings left at shrines, prayers whispered during labor, or careful adherence to laws and social codes that maintain order. In larger towns, statues of the Pharaoh and inscriptions on walls serve as daily reminders of his presence, while in villages, simple symbols, amulets, carved reliefs, or images painted on clay fill the same role, asserting his authority and inspiring reverence. The Pharaoh's shadow extends not just over labor and taxes, but over life and death itself. Officials often traveling through villages to inspect records or collect dues remind inhabitants that obedience is a matter of survival. Failure to comply could mean punishment, sometimes harsh and public, a lesson designed to maintain order and ensure that the state functions smoothly. Even as children play or women prepare food, these realities are quietly understood. The hierarchy is absolute, and every citizen's small actions ripple outward into the machinery of governance. Yet the Pharaoh's presence is not merely oppressive, it carries a sense of protection, a promise that if the people work diligently, honor the gods, and uphold Mat, life will continue in relative stability. Villagers may never witness the grandeur of the palace or the solemnity of temple rituals, but they understand through festivals, announcements, and local reports that the Pharaoh sustains the balance that makes their existence possible. Scribes, often drawn from families that have served for generations, bridged the distant court and the village, their meticulous records preserving the flow of grain, livestock, and labor required to maintain the state. They wield power quietly but profoundly, their pen shaping obligations shaping lives, and lives shaping the community's relationship to the Pharaoh. Even artisans, potters, weavers, stonemasons create objects and monuments that honor the ruler or serve state needs, their hands translating obedience and skill into forms of worship and civic service. Religion intertwines with governance, reinforcing the Pharaoh's authority. Temples dedicated to gods are often funded and built at the king's direction. Priests chant his praises alongside divine hymns, and every household shrine acknowledges both local deities and the ultimate power of the king who mediates between the mortal and spiritual realms. Children learn this duality from an early age. Obedience to parents is intertwined with lessons about respect for authority, understanding that failure to honor the Pharaoh or to act morally and responsibly in alignment with Mat carries consequences both immediate and spiritual. Villagers internalize this hierarchy not as abstract politics but as a lived reality, embedded in every choice and action, every plan for sowing crops or repairing a home, every moment of giving thanks or asking for guidance. Despite the apparent distance of the throne, the Pharaoh's influence seeps into the most intimate corners of life. Stories told at the fire, warnings to children, advice shared in markets, even the small superstitions that guide behavior are shaped by the awareness of a ruler whose power is as absolute as it is enigmatic. The grandeur of the court is visible only in glimpses, through occasional visits of royal officials, through the arrival of taxes in grain or livestock, or through the stories carried by travelers and merchants who recount the majesty of golden thrones, monumental statues, and endless processions. And yet, even without direct observation, the pharaoh shapes daily life with subtle, persistent force. The timing of planting and harvesting, the distribution of resources, the social order, and the sense of security that comes from knowing a higher authority maintains the land's fertility and justice. Farmers and laborers internalize the rhythms of obedience, finding in them both constraint and guidance. The shadow of the pharaoh is also a psychological presence, a thread that binds individuals into a collective consciousness, ensuring that the village is not merely a collection of isolated households, but a functioning part of a greater whole, connected by loyalty, tradition, and faith. Even leisure and entertainment, music, storytelling, and games often carry echoes of royal influence, celebrating victories, honoring festivals, or recounting deeds of kings long past. In quiet moments, villagers may glance toward the horizon where distant towns rise, imagining palaces, temples, and the bustling life of officials who implement the pharaoh's will, and feel both awe and humility, a mix of reverence and pragmatism that shapes thought, action, and social bonds. Life under the pharaoh is therefore a delicate negotiation between freedom and duty, survival and reverence, labor and spirituality. Every hand that tills the soil, every clay pot that is shaped, every loaf of bread that is baked, exists in a continuum of service, observation, and acknowledgement of forces larger than the individual. And yet, within this structure, human experience persists. Families laugh, quarrel, teach, and love, finding joy in the small things even as they navigate obligations dictated by unseen power. The shadow of the pharaoh is not only literal and political, but existential, a reminder that one's place in the universe is determined by forces both human and divine that cannot be fully controlled, and that daily routines, however humble, are acts of alignment with these larger rhythms. From dawn to dusk, the influence of the ruler stretches across fields, homes, and marketplaces, shaping thought, behavior, and belief, while villagers respond in ways both practical and spiritual, negotiating their survival and striving to maintain balance in a world where the unseen hand of the pharaoh touches every corner of existence. In every glance at the horizon, every whispered prayer at a household shrine, every careful effort in the fields, one can sense this presence, a persistent, invisible force that governs not only law and economy, but also the very fabric of life, ensuring that from the smallest village to the grandest city, the order of the world, as conceived by the Egyptians, is preserved, honored, and lived, quietly yet profoundly, in every moment of daily existence. By mid-morning, when the sun has risen high and the Nile shimmers with a glare that makes the river seem alive with light, the villagers begin to stir with a different energy, a rhythm that is less quiet labor and more the vibrant hum of human exchange. The market, unlike the structured toil of the fields or the silent prayers at household shrines, the market is a place of controlled chaos, of smells and sounds and textures colliding in a lively mosaic that feels simultaneously overwhelming and comforting. Narrow streets expand into open squares lined with stalls and tables, each carefully constructed from mud, bricks, reeds, and wooden planks, some covered with cloth for shade, others exposed to the relentless sun, creating a patchwork of light and shadow over the faces and goods of vendors. The air is thick with a blend of aromas, fresh fish from the Nile, their scales glinting in the sunlight, and their scent mingling with the earthy smell of grain. The sweet tang of dates, the pungent sharpness of onions and garlic, and the rich, yeasty smell of bread, still warm from ovens. Women carry large baskets balanced on their heads, filled with offerings, vegetables, or handcrafted items, while men hoist sacks of grain or bundles of reeds onto shoulders or donkeys, all moving with a practiced rhythm honed over years of participation in this social dance. Children dart between legs, laughing, arguing, and learning the subtle art of bargaining their small hands, reaching out to touch colorful cloths, shiny beads, or intricately carved wooden toys, absorbing almost imperceptibly the rules of trade value and negotiation that govern the adult world. The market is a place where every object has a story. A pot is not merely clay, but the work of a potter whose skill has been honed over years, each curve deliberate, each design meaningful. A woven mat represents both the labor of the weaver and the agricultural knowledge of the reed gatherer. A bundle of herbs carries with it both culinary and medicinal traditions. Trading is rarely done with coins, for money is scarce outside of cities. Instead, Egyptians rely on barter, exchanging goods of equal perceived value, a system that demands skill, intuition, and knowledge of local supply and demand. A basket of onions may be exchanged for a handful of fish, a loaf of bread for a small clay cup, and the transaction is accompanied by negotiation, humor, and the subtle play of social cues, gestures, and tone of voice. Vendors shout their wares, rhythmic calls rising above the crowd. Fresh fish, just caught from the Nile, or sweet dates, the finest this season. The cries are not random noise but carefully modulated signals, meant to attract attention while conveying reliability and quality. Teaching children and newcomers alike the performance aspect of trade. Shoppers move deliberately, examining goods with keen eyes. They check the texture of bread, the shine of pottery, the ripeness of fruit, and the strength of textiles, weighing every choice, carefully aware that each trade has immediate and long-term consequences for survival. Community gossip weaves through the market, like an invisible thread, carried in whispers between stalls, offering news, warnings, or rumors about local conditions, crop yields, or visits from officials. The market is as much social as economic. Friends meet to exchange words, elders share advice or rebuke, and children imitate adults in small, playful versions of trade, developing social intelligence alongside practical skills. There is also a spiritual layer to market life. Offerings to the gods may be sold alongside goods, incense, and amulets displayed to ensure protection or luck in barter, reminding all who participate that even in commerce, the unseen world is present and influential. Merchants may invoke a god's blessing before a transaction, or a buyer may mutter a small prayer, hoping that divine favor ensures fairness. Seasonal festivals heighten the vibrancy of the market, as colorful fabrics, fresh produce, and special crafts appear alongside entertainers, musicians, and dancers, turning the square into a celebration of both trade and community. The clatter of pots, the hum of conversation, the calls of merchants, and the laughter of children blend into a living symphony that is both chaotic and harmonious, a reflection of the village itself, structured yet flexible, functional yet imbued with human warmth and creativity. Even small disputes, over a loaf of bread or the price of a fish, are handled within a framework of social norms and negotiation skills, often mediated by elders or respected neighbors, teaching young observers the delicate balance of fairness, persuasion, and patience. Beyond mere survival, the market is a place where culture and knowledge are exchanged alongside goods. Stories are told, advice is given, recipes shared, and news travels faster than the Nile's current, reinforcing social bonds and creating a sense of shared identity and mutual dependency. The textures of life in the market are tangible. The rough coarseness of grain sacks, the smooth curve of a pottery jug, the prickly stems of bundled herbs, the soft warmth of cloth freshly dyed, the cool dampness of fish held momentarily in bare hands. All these details are noticed and remembered by buyers and sellers alike, forming an unspoken understanding of value, quality, and reliability. As the day progresses, the heat intensifies, forcing some vendors to seek shade, while others persist, shouting more loudly, drawing in latecomers from neighboring villages or the edges of town. Sweat drips from brows, feet ache, and the air thickens with dust, yet the rhythm continues, unbroken, each trade a thread in the vast network of survival and connection. Evening approaches, and goods are tallied, leftovers bundled and carried home. Children are coaxed away from the stalls, and the market gradually empties, leaving behind a silence that contrasts sharply with the morning's activity. Yet in that silence, the lingering smells, scattered tools, and footprints in the dust speak of a day spent in collaboration, negotiation, and community. A day that strengthens not only individual survival, but the cohesion of the village itself. The market is more than a place to acquire necessities. It is the heartbeat of daily life, the stage on which social, economic, and spiritual threads converge, teaching lessons about human behavior, adaptability, and the constant negotiation required to thrive in a land that is both generous and merciless. By sunset, as traders return home, animals are herded back, and fires begin to glow in small courtyards. The market's vibrancy settles into memory, leaving behind the quiet knowledge that life is built not only on labor and obedience, but also on connection, exchange, and the shared rhythms that knit a community together. In this space, amid the smells, sounds, textures, and faces, one can sense the essence of ancient Egypt itself. A civilization defined as much by its people and their interactions as by the monuments and temples that outsiders remember. A society where survival, faith, and human ingenuity intertwine in every loaf of bread, every traded fish, and every whispered blessing that passes between vendor and buyer, teacher and child, neighbor and stranger. In ancient Egypt, the preparation, consumption, and sharing of food is far more than mere survival. It is a ritual, a rhythm, and a reflection of the land, the river, and the intricate social tapestry that binds every household together. From the moment the sun rises over the Nile and the first light spills across mud brick walls, the smell of bread baking begins to drift through courtyards, mingling with the earthy temps of freshly drawn water and the faint aroma of herbs tucked into small garden patches. Bread, the cornerstone of the Egyptian diet, is central not just to meals but to offerings at shrines, to trade at markets, and to the identity of the household itself. Women grind grain using heavy circular stones, the coarse flour falling like soft dust onto woven mats, then knead the dough with hands calloused by years of labor. Sometimes the bread is leavened, sometimes flat, sometimes shaped into small loaves or simple cakes. Each variation reflects both the household's resources and the creativity of the maker. In wealthier homes, small portions of honey or dates might be kneaded into the dough, offering sweetness that transforms a simple staple into something celebratory. Meanwhile, other foods are prepared with similar care and attention to ritual. Lentils, chickpeas, and beans are boiled or roasted, providing protein to balance the carbohydrate-heavy diet. Vegetables, onions, leeks, garlic, radishes, cucumbers are plucked fresh from garden beds or bought at the market, often eaten raw or lightly cooked over open fires. Fish from the Nile is salted or dried for preservation, sometimes grilled over embers or boiled in clay pots with a handful of herbs, offering sustenance to families both near the riverbanks and further inland. Meat is far less common for ordinary villagers, reserved for special occasions or for those able to afford livestock. When it is present, it is treated with ceremony and care, roasted or boiled slowly to maximize flavor and minimize waste. Meals are communal, taken together at low benches or mats spread on the floor. The act of eating is interwoven with conversation, instruction, and observation. Elders teach children not only how to chew and swallow, but also the rhythms of sharing, manners, and gratitude. Every meal, no matter how simple, is an exercise in attentiveness, discipline, and awareness of the world beyond the home. Water from the Nile, drawn early in the morning and kept cool in clay jars, is the primary drink, replenishing the body after labor and heat. Beer, brewed from barley, is both a staple and a comfort. Thick and slightly sour, offering calories and hydration in a single sip. Consumed in small quantities by men and women alike. Wine, rarer and more expensive, is reserved for wealthier households or ceremonial use, fermented carefully and stored in sealed vessels to maintain both flavor and potency. Even the simplest meals carry layers of meaning. Salt, herbs, and spices are not only culinary, they are symbols of connection to the river, the land, and the divine. Meals are accompanied by small prayers or blessings, whispers of thanks to household gods and spirits, ensuring that sustenance is recognized as both a gift and a responsibility. Cooking is laborious yet intimate, an activity that reinforces family bonds, preserves knowledge, and teaches practical skills. The sight of smoke rising from clay ovens, the sound of grinding stones, the warmth of the fire, and the scent of simmering foods create a sensory landscape that defines the household, marking the passage of time and the rhythm of life. Even preparation itself is layered with routine and observation, checking grains for pests, gauging the ripeness of vegetables, tasting liquids for balance, and adjusting firewood to maintain the proper heat. All require attention honed by experience and repetition. Meals are also shaped by the seasons, the ebb and flow of the Nile, and the limits of available resources. During the inundation, certain foods are abundant. Fish is plentiful, reeds are thick, and fertile mud nurtures fresh vegetables. When the flood recedes and the land dries, stored grains and preserved foods take center stage, reflecting human ingenuity in harnessing and extending the gifts of nature. Even for the poorest households, creativity and resourcefulness allow a variety of flavors and textures. Herbs, legumes, and small fish combine to create meals that nourish both body and spirit. Sharing food is an essential social act. Visitors, neighbors, or extended family members are often offered portions, reinforcing bonds of trust, hospitality, and community. Children learn early that meals are not only for sustenance but also for exchange of stories, advice, and social connection. The act of eating becomes a microcosm of societal order, teaching patience, cooperation, and the importance of observing and respecting social norms. Beyond sustenance, food functions as a spiritual medium. Portions are set aside for gods or ancestors. Bread is placed on household shrines, and water or beer is poured as an offering. A subtle but constant reminder that life and nourishment are dependent on forces beyond human control. Festivals and religious celebrations amplify the importance of food, transforming everyday sustenance into feasts of abundance, where meat, fish, wine, honey, and special breads are prepared in excess. And the act of eating becomes an expression of joy, gratitude, and communal identity. Even the smallest households participate in this ritualized approach to food, adjusting their modest ingredients to reflect the season, occasion, and the favor of the gods. The sensory details of meals, the texture of coarse bread, the fragrance of simmering lentils, the coolness of Nile water, the warm aroma of herbs and roasted fish create memories, mark time, and anchor individuals in their environment. The careful preparation, the shared consumption, and the ceremonial acknowledgement of divine forces imbue each meal with significance beyond mere calories. In these daily acts, one can see the essence of Egyptian life, labor, and reward intertwined, human skill and divine favor coexisting, and the small rhythms of the household shaping experience, identity, and survival. By evening, when the sun dips low and the long shadows stretch across courtyards, families gather once again, sometimes sharing simple meals of bread, lentils, and vegetables, sometimes celebrating abundance with fish or preserved meats. Conversations flow freely, stories are told, children practice their recitations, and elders impart wisdom, all against the backdrop of a day shaped by toil, exchange, and the nurturing of body and spirit. Even as night descends, the cycle continues in memory and preparation. Flour is ground for the next day, water drawn and stored, and small offerings made to gods or ancestors, connecting sustenance to survival, faith, and social cohesion. Life in ancient Egypt, when viewed through the lens of food, drink, and meals, is a study in rhythm, patience, and attentiveness, where the preparation and sharing of nourishment is both practical and sacred, both communal and individual, a continuous thread connecting the living to their environment, their families, and the unseen forces that govern existence along the timeless Nile. While fields and markets formed the visible backbone of daily life in ancient Egypt, another layer pulses quietly, yet profoundly through villages and towns. The world of craftsmen and artisans whose skill, patience, and creativity shape not only the objects of everyday use, but also the monuments, temples, and art that endure through millennia. These men and women, often drawn from families that have passed their trade down through generations, inhabit workshops that are sometimes small, dimly lit spaces within homes or open-air yards where sun and wind act as assistants in the shaping, drying, and finishing of materials. The work is precise, physical, and mentally demanding. It requires an intimate knowledge of materials: clay, stone, wood, reeds, metals, and pigments, all with an understanding of form, function, and aesthetics. Even the humblest household item, such as a clay pot or woven mat, carries a signature of care, a mark of human intelligence and dexterity, and a reflection of cultural priorities. Stone carvers labor patiently over granite or limestone, tapping with copper or bronze chisels, each strike deliberate, careful not to fracture the block and ruin weeks of effort. Dust rises in thin, shimmering clouds in the sunlight, settling on sweat-soaked skin, hair, and clothing. And yet, the work proceeds in silence, punctuated by rhythmic strikes, the occasional measured conversation, and the constant, almost meditative focus that transforms raw stone into jars, statues, stelae, and sarcophagi. Potters, seated low beside their wheels, spin clay into vessels, bowls, and figurines, hands coated in wet earth, fingers moving with practiced precision to shape, smooth, and trim the forms. Their skill is a combination of memory, intuition, and muscle. The clay responds to their touch in subtle ways, and a slight misjudgment can lead to cracking, sagging, or collapse, so concentration is absolute. When forms are completed, they are left to dry in the sun or in simple kilns, their surfaces scored or decorated with symbols, inscriptions, or painted patterns that communicate not only function but identity, belief, and social status. Weavers sit with fibers stretched taut, fingers dancing across reeds, linen threads, or palm fibers, creating mats, cloth, and ropes that are both practical and beautiful. Patterns are passed down over generations, sometimes improvising based on availability of materials, sometimes reflecting local taste or spiritual significance. Color is carefully derived from natural pigments, requiring knowledge of minerals, plants, and careful processing to ensure durability, vibrancy, and safety. Metalworkers, though less common in villages, work with copper, bronze, and occasionally gold or silver, hammering, casting, and joining metals to form tools, weapons, jewelry, and ceremonial objects. Their workshops are small, hot, and smoky, filled with furnaces, anvils, molds, and the constant clang of hammer on metal, each sound a note in the symphony of labor that echoes through streets and alleys. Apprentices are a constant presence, learning through observation, imitation, and hands-on guidance, absorbing not only the technical knowledge of the craft, but the social and cultural expectations that accompany it. Patience, attention to detail, pride in one's work, and an understanding of how every object fits into the broader society. Even the simplest household item, an earthen jar, a reed basket, a carved figurine, carries layers of meaning. These objects are not only functional but also symbolic, often inscribed with motifs representing protection, fertility, the Nile, or local deities. The act of creation itself is imbued with spiritual significance, as artisans understand that their hands mediate between raw material and purpose, between natural forces and human needs. In towns and cities, the work of artisans extends into the monumental. Builders, masons, and sculptors participate in temple construction, tomb carving, and the crafting of statues intended to honor gods, kings, and ancestors. Here, precision is absolute, and mistakes can be catastrophic. Teams work in coordination, measuring, leveling, chiseling, polishing, and painting with a shared understanding of both technical requirements and ritual importance. Even small workshops within villages feed into these projects, producing bricks, tiles, tools, or ceremonial items that travel via river or road to larger centers. The daily life of artisans is a delicate balance of physical exertion and mental concentration. Hands blister, backs ache, eyes strain, yet there is pride in mastery, a satisfaction in watching raw materials transform under patient effort into objects of utility, beauty, and meaning. Socially, artisans hold a complex position. They are respected for skill, sometimes elevated within guild-like structures, yet their labor is demanding, often under the supervision of officials, priests, or wealthy patrons who ensure output, quality, and alignment with tradition. Market days bring opportunities to exchange goods, learn new techniques, and observe innovations in neighboring workshops, creating a network of knowledge and mutual influence that sustains craftsmanship over generations. Children often participate from an early age, initially performing simple tasks such as grinding pigments, carrying tools, or tending fires, gradually advancing to shaping, weaving, carving, or hammering as their dexterity, understanding, and strength grow. By adolescence, many are fully integrated into the workflow, blending learning, practice, and observation, ensuring continuity of the craft within the family or community. Festivals and religious events add an additional layer to the artisan's work. Objects created for rituals, offerings, or ceremonies demand extra attention, as their function is both practical and symbolic. The symbolism must be precise, and mistakes are not only technical failures but spiritual missteps, potentially offending gods or disrupting the harmony of the event. The rhythm of the day is punctuated by sun, labor, meals, and rest, yet even during downtime, artisans remain engaged, discussing technique, observing natural forms, or mentally planning the next creation. Craftsmanship is therefore not simply a vocation but a philosophy, a way of interacting with the material and spiritual worlds simultaneously, where patience, observation, and skill translate into both survival and cultural expression. Across the village, the combined effort of craftsmen and artisans forms an invisible backbone of society, providing containers for grain and water, tools for work, vessels for cooking, objects for worship, and decorative items that bring beauty into the home. Their work mediates between raw nature and human needs, between the mundane and the sacred, shaping the rhythms of daily life, the economy, and cultural identity. The textures, sounds, and scents of the workshop, the scratch of chisel on stone, the hum of spinning wheel, the roughness of clay, the faint tang of metal, the soft rustle of woven fibers, form a sensory landscape that is as vivid as any scene along the Nile or in the market. And in every creation, one sees the patience, skill, and humanity of the individual artisan, whose hands translate knowledge, tradition, and creativity into objects that sustain, protect, and inspire, ensuring that life in ancient Egypt is not merely about survival, labor, or obedience, but also about expression, mastery, and the enduring human impulse to shape the world around them with care, skill, and meaning. In the villages, fields, and homes of ancient Egypt, children form a world entirely their own, yet one inseparable from the rhythms, responsibilities, and expectations of adult life, a delicate balance between play, observation, and the gradual acquisition of skills that will prepare them for survival and participation in society. From the moment they wake, often before the sun fully illuminates the mud brick homes, children are embedded in the daily routines of their families, fetching water, helping to grind grain, tending small flocks of goats or ducks, carrying firewood, or assisting mothers and older siblings in household chores. Yet alongside these duties, play exists not as a frivolous activity, but as an essential element of learning, socialization, and the cultivation of physical and mental dexterity. Children fashion toys from whatever materials are at hand, dolls carved from clay or shaped from scraps of fabric, Miniature boats of papyrus reed small balls of twined fibers for rolling or tossing games, and even simple musical instruments like rattles or flutes. These objects are not merely diversions, they are practice tools, helping children understand balance, coordination, and creativity, and preparing them for the kinds of practical skills, craftsmanship, trade, and domestic labor they will need as adults. Play is often communal, with groups of children gathering in courtyards, alleys, or along riverbanks, negotiating rules, turns, and roles with surprising sophistication. Games imitate adult life. They act out market transactions, manage pretend livestock, or dramatize ceremonies and festivals, allowing children to explore social hierarchies, cooperation, competition, and fairness in a controlled and understandable environment. Observation is another cornerstone of childhood learning. Children watch mothers bake bread, knead dough, and prepare meals. They watch fathers plow fields, tend animals, or construct tools. They watch artisans shape clay, weave fibers, and carve stone. Through imitation, repetition, and occasional guidance, they internalize techniques, timing, and practical knowledge, laying the foundation for adult competence. Even seemingly mundane tasks are imbued with layers of cultural, practical, and spiritual meaning, and children absorb these lessons slowly and intuitively, learning to connect action with consequence, effort with reward, and behavior with social expectation. Education, when formalized, is primarily reserved for boys from wealthier or more prominent families. Scribes, trained in the use of reed pens, ink, and papyrus, spend long hours mastering hieroglyphics, arithmetic, and administrative practices that will allow them to participate in government, temple work, or estate management. The path is exacting. Mistakes are recorded in physical marks on wax, tablets, or in chalk, corrected with patience and repeated until mastery is achieved. Even for these boys, however, education is closely tied to practical utility, with lessons in reading and writing intended to serve the state or temple rather than personal enlightenment. For girls and boys in less affluent households, education is largely experiential, occurring within the home and community. Life skills, cooking, cleaning, crafting, weaving, tending animals, and understanding religious and cultural norms are taught daily, integrated seamlessly with labor, play, and ritual. Stories told by elders at evening fires or during rest periods serve both entertainment and instruction, embedding lessons about morality, survival, and tradition within narrative frameworks that are engaging and memorable. Play, work, and education converge along the Nile. Children assist in planting seeds, collecting water, or transporting small loads, learning the precise timing, methods, and observations needed to maintain balance with the environment. They observe seasonal changes, animal behavior, and river currents, acquiring a deep intuitive knowledge of the land and its resources, which is reinforced by repetition, imitation, and hands-on experience. Festivals and religious events provide additional contexts for learning, as children participate in dances, processions, and ritual practices, absorbing social and spiritual norms, while experiencing joy, community, and cultural continuity. The sensory environment of childhood is vivid and formative. The smell of baked bread, the texture of clay or woven fibers, the sound of flutes and drums, the warmth of sunlight on the Nile banks, and the feel of mud water or sand beneath their fingers and feet. These impressions are not only playful or aesthetic, they are functional, developing coordination, memory, and awareness, all essential for survival and social integration. Even discipline is intertwined with learning. Elders, parents, and teachers correct mistakes, sometimes sternly, sometimes through demonstration or storytelling, instilling an understanding of consequences, responsibility, and the importance of precision and attention in both labor and ritual. Religion and superstition permeate childhood, shaping behavior, beliefs, and routines. Children learn to offer small gifts at household shrines, recite prayers, and respect taboos, understanding that survival, health, and well-being are tied to actions that honor gods, spirits, and ancestors. These lessons are reinforced through stories, observation of adults, and participation in daily rituals, creating a seamless integration of practical, moral, and spiritual education. The process of growing up is gradual, measured by the sun's passage, the seasonal rhythms of planting and harvest, and the incremental mastery of skills, rituals, and social expectations. Children are active participants in their learning, experimenting, observing, and refining abilities in a continuous feedback loop that blends work, play, and culture. Socialization is equally important. Friendships are formed early, with children negotiating, cooperating, and sometimes competing, developing emotional intelligence, empathy, and communication skills. Games mimic real-life tasks, conflicts, or ceremonies, providing a safe space to understand relationships, hierarchy, and social norms. By adolescence, children have internalized not only practical and technical skills, but also the ethical, cultural, and spiritual frameworks necessary for participation in village, market, and family life. This slow, immersive education ensures that each new generation is prepared to contribute meaningfully to society, to uphold traditions, and to maintain the delicate balance between survival, faith, and communal cohesion that defines ancient Egypt. Even small children, whose hands are too small to shape clay or pull plows, are learning through observation, imitation, and storytelling, absorbing the rhythms, techniques, and ethics of adult life. By the time they reach adolescence, they have already mastered the basics of labor, social interaction, and ritual practice, ready to assume responsibilities and take their place in the continuity of community and civilization. The world of childhood is therefore not separate from the adult world, but deeply intertwined. Play, observation, and education are inseparable from labor, ritual, and social expectation, forming a continuous thread that sustains both individuals and society. In this way, every child contributes to the cycle of life along the Nile, absorbing skills, knowledge, and values that have persisted for generations, ensuring that the essence of Egyptian culture, belief, and daily routine continues, quietly, methodically, and profoundly. One small step, one game, one lesson, and one day at a time. In ancient Egypt, the way people dressed and presented themselves was far more than a simple matter of covering the body. It was a language of identity, social status, function, and belief, woven seamlessly into the rhythms of daily life, the demands of work, and the dictates of climate and culture. From sunrise, villagers and city dwellers alike were attuned to these invisible codes, adjusting their garments, jewelry, and personal grooming not only to practicality, but to expression, conformity, and occasionally, aspiration. The vast majority of ordinary Egyptians, those tilling the fields, tending animals, or engaging in domestic labor, wore garments that were simple, functional, and suited to the intense heat of the sun-drenched land. Linen, spun from flax grown along the Nile, was the primary fabric. Lightweight, breathable, and durable, it allowed the body to remain cool during long hours in the fields, while also absorbing the sweat and dust of labor. Men typically wore simple kilts or skirts, wrapped and tied round the waist, leaving the upper body bare, though some might drape a shawl or cloak during cooler mornings or evenings. Women's clothing often consisted of straight, tubular dresses or skirts, sometimes held with a cord or belt, with shoulders left bare or covered with narrow straps, offering both mobility and relief from the heat. Clothing, however, was never purely practical. Even within these simple garments, Egyptians expressed individuality, family identity, and social signaling. The quality of the linen, its fineness, weave, and cleanliness communicated wealth and status, and subtle decorations, pleats, or dyed threads, could indicate regional origin, occupation, or familial lineage. Beyond fabric, adornment played a vital role in personal appearance. Jewelry was ubiquitous, crafted from gold, copper, faience, semi-precious stones, and beads, worn by both men and women as a mark of social rank, spiritual protection, and aesthetic taste. Necklaces, bracelets, earrings, rings, and amulets were more than decorative. Each piece carried symbolic meaning, often invoking protection from the gods, fertility, or health. A child might wear a small amulet shaped like a fish or scarab, believed to safeguard against evil spirits, while adults displayed larger, more intricate pieces that signaled wealth, profession, or devotion. Hairstyles and grooming were equally significant. Hair was a canvas for self-expression, identity, and hygiene. Many Egyptians shaved their heads or kept hair short to combat lice and cope with the heat, while others wore wigs made of human hair or plant fibers, styled in elaborate braids, curls, or extensions for ceremonial purposes or to signify status. Children's hair often remained simple, sometimes shaved with a lock left on one side as a symbol of youth or family tradition. Men maintained beards selectively. Some wore false beards during rituals, symbolizing divine association, while women often plucked facial hair, a practice that connected cleanliness with beauty and spiritual purity. Personal hygiene intertwined with clothing and appearance. Daily washing in Nile water or small basins was common, especially in urban areas, and scented oils were applied to hair, skin, and garments, both to mask odors and as a spiritual or medicinal act. The application of kohl to eyes served a dual purpose, protecting against the harsh glare of the sun and warding off infections, while also functioning as an aesthetic statement. Footwear was minimal for most, often simple sandals of woven reeds or leather, worn primarily for protection from rough terrain or ceremonial purposes. Many people went barefoot during daily labor, their feet toughened and resilient. Social hierarchy shaped appearance dramatically. Nobility, priests, and officials adorned themselves with richer fabrics, dyed in vibrant colors like red, blue, and green, and accessorized with more elaborate jewelry, wigs, and ceremonial items. Their garments often included pleated or draped features, patterned fabrics, and decorative fringes, signaling their elevated position and participation in state or religious functions. Priests, in particular, maintained distinctive dress codes, donning white linen robes, special sashes, and ritual ornaments that set them apart visually and spiritually, reinforcing their role as intermediaries between mortals and the divine. Children's clothing and appearance reflected a mix of function, tradition, and protection. They often wore simple linen garments suited to movement and play, sometimes with amulets or small charms attached to ward off evil, and their hair and personal grooming marked age, gender, or family tradition. Even infants were swaddled in linen strips or simple garments, with tiny beads or charms attached, reflecting both care and belief in supernatural guardianship. Daily life required adaptability in dress. Work in the fields, markets, workshops, or homes demanded clothing that allowed freedom of movement, durability, and comfort. Ceremonial or social occasions, however, called for adornment, grooming, and display, creating a rhythm in which clothing was both functional and performative, responsive to context and expectation. The visual language of fashion communicated not only personal tastes but social intelligence, the ability to navigate hierarchies, show respect, and participate appropriately in communal, familial, and religious life. Even the smallest details, folds in linen, arrangement of a wig, placement of a bead, sheen of applied oil were observed, noted, and understood, forming a subtle but pervasive code of appearance that governed social interaction. Festivals, religious observances, and official ceremonies amplified these expressions, as Egyptians donned their finest linen, jewelry, and wigs, painted eyes with kohl, and adorned themselves with fragrant oils, collectively performing identity, status, and devotion before gods, neighbors, and visitors. the sensory world of clothing and appearance, the softness or coarseness of linen, the coolness of water on skin, the weight and glint of jewelry, the scent of oils, the warmth of sun on bare shoulders was intertwined with emotion, memory, and social learning, embedding in every individual a sense of belonging, propriety, and self-presentation. In essence, clothing and appearance in ancient Egypt were far more than personal choice. They were a medium through which identity, spirituality, social hierarchy, and practicality converged. Every stitch, fold, amulet, and brush of oil carried layers of meaning, connecting individuals to family, community, gods, and the broader cultural ethos. To observe a village, a city street, or a ceremonial gathering was to witness a living expression of values, priorities, and human ingenuity, woven seamlessly into the very fabric of life. Life in ancient Egypt was as fragile as it was vibrant, and the daily struggle to maintain health and ward off illness was a fundamental part of existence, touching every home, family, and individual. Despite the Nile's generosity and the fertile soil it provided, disease, injury, and physical strain were constant companions. From the smallest village to bustling city centers, Egyptians developed an intricate understanding of the body, herbal remedies, and practical techniques, blending observation, tradition, and spirituality into a system that sought to protect life and prolong it whenever possible. Children learned early the importance of hygiene, cleanliness, and attentiveness to bodily needs. Parents washed infants in cool Nile water, gently massaging the skin and applying oils infused with herbs, simultaneously soothing the child and protecting against infections or irritations. Soap, made from a mixture of animal fats and plant ash, was applied to the body, while clean linen, swaddling, or garments minimized contact with dirt and parasites. Even the most mundane tasks, preparing food, drawing water, tending animals, were accompanied by awareness of cleanliness, a recognition that health depended on both effort and environment. For adults, maintaining health was a combination of physical labor, diet, and attentiveness to the body's signals. Work in the fields or workshops, while essential for survival, brought its own risks. Cuts from tools, sunburn, exhaustion, and musculoskeletal strain. Egyptians developed practical methods to address these issues, bandaging wounds with linen strips, applying honey or resins to prevent infection, and using poultices made from herbs, mud, or crushed plants to soothe pain or inflammation. Knowledge of medicinal plants was widespread and often passed down orally, from parent to child, healer to apprentice. Garlic, onions, and herbs like coriander, cumin, and fenugreek were valued not only for flavor, but for their believed protective and restorative properties. Honey, prized for its natural antiseptic qualities, was used to treat wounds, while salts and minerals served both as cleansing agents and in preserving substances for medicinal use. More serious ailments were approached with a combination of empirical and spiritual techniques. The householder might consult a healer, often someone skilled in both medicine and ritual, who would examine the patient, prescribe a regimen of herbs, oils, or poultices, and sometimes recite incantations to ward off malevolent spirits thought to cause illness. The distinction between physical and spiritual health was fluid. Disease was often interpreted as a consequence of imbalance between body and environment, or between mortal and divine. Forces and remedies sought to restore harmony on all levels. Temples played a central role in health and medicine. Many had dedicated shrines or rooms for healing, staffed by priests trained in herbal medicine, massage, and ritual. Pilgrims traveled to these centers seeking cures for maladies ranging from digestive problems to infections, often receiving treatments that combined practical intervention with spiritual guidance, including prayers, amulets, or offerings. Even routine ailments, headaches, fatigue, minor infections were addressed with a combination of physical and spiritual care. Herbal teas, compresses, and salves were applied in tandem with spoken words, charms, and ritual gestures. Women, responsible for the majority of household care, were intimately familiar with these remedies. They prepared infusions, poultices, and ointments from locally available plants, oil, and honey, monitoring the health of children, elders, and family members. Their knowledge was practical, adaptive, and often deeply rooted in observation, noting which herbs soothed pain, which oils aided skin health, and which applications protected against common maladies or pests. Midwives and elder women were especially revered for their expertise in childbirth. Understanding both the physiology and the rituals surrounding labor, they advised expectant mothers on diet, position, and spiritual practices to ensure the safe arrival of a child, combining empirical observation with prayers and charms intended to protect both mother and infant. Sanitation, though rudimentary, played a significant role in daily health. Houses were designed to minimize waste accumulation, and the use of the Nile for bathing, cooking, and irrigation was tempered by careful practices to avoid contamination. Villagers understood, often intuitively, that stagnant water, spoiled food, or dirty surfaces led to sickness, and social norms reinforced attention to hygiene in both private and communal spaces. Injuries, whether from tools, animals, or accidents, were treated with immediacy and care. Linen, bandages, resins, and honey were used to clean, protect, and promote healing. Splints made from wood or reed stabilized fractures, while massages and movement exercises were employed to restore mobility. Even without modern understanding of germs, Egyptians recognized the importance of cleansing and protection, and their methods often proved effective. Nutrition was intimately connected to health. The staples of the Egyptian diet, bread, lentils, vegetables, fish, provided essential energy, but they were often supplemented with herbs, oils, and occasional meat or dairy when available. Meals were not only sustenance but preventive medicine. Garlic for vitality, onions for digestion, coriander for cleansing, and beer for hydration and calories. Attention to balance, moderation, and seasonal availability reflected a practical understanding of diet as a cornerstone of well-being. Older adults, carrying decades of labor and experience, relied on both accumulated knowledge and community support to maintain health. Simple exercises, herbal treatments, and careful attention to diet helped sustain mobility and vitality, while community rituals and festivals reinforced spiritual health and social connection. The interplay between mind and body was recognized in ways that mirrored spiritual beliefs. Fear, anxiety, and social conflict were thought to manifest physically, and remedies might include calming rituals, prayers, or amulets alongside practical treatment. Children, too, learned through observation and participation. They watched the preparation of poultices, the wrapping of bandages, and the administration of teas and infusions, internalizing methods and wisdom that would equip them to care for themselves and others. They also witnessed the integration of ritual into health, understanding that maintaining harmony with God's ancestors and natural forces was inseparable from physical well-being. Epidemics and serious illnesses were less understood but responded to with community measures, isolation when feasible, and collective ritual, highlighting both practical observation and spiritual interpretation. Though limited in scientific explanation, these practices reflect a nuanced awareness of environment, behavior, and causality, and they demonstrate how closely daily life, labor, and belief were intertwined with survival. In sum, health in ancient Egypt was a continuous negotiation between body, environment, and spirit. Remedies were practical yet symbolic, preventive yet reactive, empirical yet ritualized. Every household, workshop, and temple contributed to this ecosystem of care, blending experience, observation, and tradition. From the daily washing of children to the preparation of medicinal poultices, from midwives guiding childbirth to herbalists treating fevers, Egyptians navigated life with a deep, tactile, and spiritual awareness of health. The lessons learned in these routines, attention, patience, observation, and care were not abstract. They were survival, integrated into the rhythms of work, play, family, and worship, creating a society that, despite its limitations, understood profoundly that life was precious, fragile, and intimately connected to the natural and spiritual world around it. Religion in ancient Egypt was not a compartment of life, set aside for ceremonies or grand temples. It was an ever-present rhythm, woven seamlessly into daily routines, family practices, and work. From the moment people awoke to the first light of the sun over the Nile, their lives were intertwined with the sacred, shaped by beliefs, rituals, and deities that governed every aspect of existence. Each household had its own small shrine or sacred space, often a simple alcove or shelf holding statues, figurines, or offerings. These domestic sanctuaries were tended daily, reflecting the intimate, personal aspect of Egyptian spirituality. Early in the morning, a mother might place a small bowl of bread, a cup of water, or a sprinkling of incense before a household god, whispering prayers for protection, health, and favor throughout the day. Children observed these acts, learning that devotion was not abstract but practical, a set of behaviors that shaped daily life and human relationships with the divine. Daily worship was both structured and flexible. Individuals might recite prayers upon waking, give thanks for food and water, or offer small gestures of respect to unseen spirits that were believed to inhabit objects, spaces, or natural elements. Even labor in the fields or craftwork carried a spiritual dimension. Offerings were made before beginning important tasks. Prayers were muttered to ensure safe passage or successful outcomes, and gestures such as washing hands or sprinkling water were both practical and symbolic, connecting human action to divine oversight. Temples elevated these practices to a communal and ceremonial scale. Priests performed rituals that regulated not only spiritual life, but also societal and agricultural rhythms, timing ceremonies with the inundation of the Nile, the planting and harvest seasons, and major civic or religious festivals. Inside these sacred spaces, intricate rituals were performed daily, involving purification, offerings, incense, chants, and the careful handling of sacred objects. Ordinary Egyptians might not witness every act, but the effects were felt across communities. Blessings were believed to flow into crops, households, and cities, reinforcing both faith and social cohesion. Festivals punctuated the calendar, turning ordinary routines into communal celebrations of divine favor and human survival. These events could involve processions along the Nile, music, dance, ritual bathing, and the display of statues or sacred emblems. Participation was not optional. It was an expression of belonging, piety, and societal duty, teaching the young through observation and imitation that human life was inseparable from the divine order. Gods and goddesses were diverse, reflecting the environment, social structure, and existential concerns of Egyptians. Ra, the sun god, was honored at dawn with prayers and gestures that acknowledged the life-giving force of sunlight. Osiris, deity of death and rebirth, was invoked in matters of mortality, agriculture, and familial continuity. Isis and Hathor represented protection, fertility, and nurturing, their influence woven into domestic rituals, childbirth practices, and family celebrations. Offerings, bread, beer, oils, incense, or small figurines were prepared meticulously, symbolizing both gratitude and reciprocity. Humans acknowledged divine provision while seeking favor, protection, and guidance in return. The physicality of worship reinforced connection. Kneeling, bowing, sprinkling water, lighting incense, and the careful arrangement of offerings transformed intention into tangible action, linking thought, body, and environment. Even minor gestures carried weight. Placing a bowl of water for a local deity, lighting a small lamp, or whispering a prayer during work reinforced the perception that the spiritual world was active, responsive, and intimately connected to daily life. Magical and protective practices coexisted with formal worship. Amulets, charms, and talismans were worn or placed in homes to guard against illness, misfortune, or malevolent spirits. Spells and incantations, recorded on papyrus or recited verbally, aimed to influence outcomes in labor, health, or relationships. The line between ritual, magic, and religion was fluid. All were considered legitimate means to interact with, appease, and benefit from the unseen forces that governed existence. Religious practice extended beyond humans to animals and the environment. Sacred animals, such as cats, crocodiles, and ibises, were revered and protected, seen as living manifestations of divine energy. Trees, rivers, and natural formations were imbued with spiritual significance, and actions like planting crops, building homes, or drawing water from the Nile were performed with awareness of the divine presence, ensuring that labor and devotion coexisted. Education in faith was a daily, immersive experience. Children observed rituals, learned prayers, and participated in smaller offerings, internalizing the connection between morality, labor, and piety. Stories of gods, ancestors, and mythical events were recited during meals, in courtyards, and at bedtime, teaching ethics, consequences, and the cultural understanding of life and death. The interplay between spirituality and health was constant. Prayers were said over the sick, protective amulets were worn, and herbs were combined with ritual incantations to heal and guard the body. This integration of the material and spiritual reflected a holistic worldview in which health, prosperity, and survival were inseparable from religious observance. In communal life, religious practice structured time, social hierarchy, and civic responsibility. Work schedules, market days, festivals, and family rituals were all influenced by sacred calendars, ensuring that human activity aligned with divine rhythms. Temples and priests acted as both spiritual guides and social regulators, bridging the everyday and the cosmic, the personal and the political. Even in solitude, Egyptians maintained constant spiritual awareness. Simple axe washing before meals, offering a pinch of grain to the gods, observing the sun's movement were continuous reminders of mortality, responsibility, and connection. Through these routines, religion was not a separate domain, but an ever-present companion, shaping behavior, sustaining community, and embedding ethical and cultural norms into the texture of daily life. By evening, when shadows lengthened and lamps were lit, households gathered for prayer, reflection, and offerings. The day's labor, play, and meals were acknowledged before the divine, reinforcing gratitude, humility, and continuity. Sleep itself was intertwined with faith. Protective spells, charms, and whispered prayers accompanied children and adults alike, ensuring safety and reinforcing the belief that life was both a human endeavor and a sacred trust. In essence, religious practices and daily worship in ancient Egypt were inseparable from ordinary existence. They framed the day, guided action, and mediated the relationship between humans, the natural world, and the unseen forces. Every gesture, prayer, and offering was both practical and symbolic, reflecting a civilization in which devotion, labor, social order, and survival were woven together in a continuous, living tapestry, shaping identity, behavior, and the human experience along the timeless Nile. Life in ancient Egypt was undeniably structured around labor, survival, and ritual, yet moments of leisure, music, and entertainment were integral to the human experience, offering respite, joy, and a way to connect socially, emotionally, and spiritually. These moments were neither frivolous nor purely recreational. They were woven into the rhythms of work, celebration, and family life, providing cultural cohesion and personal satisfaction that sustained individuals through the challenges of daily existence. In homes, courtyards, and open spaces along the Nile, music was ubiquitous. Simple instruments, crafted by artisans with intimate knowledge of sound and material, filled the air with melodies that both accompanied work and created opportunities for communal enjoyment. flutes carved from reeds, rattles made of clay or seeds, lyres with strings of gut, and drums of stretched animal hide provided a wide spectrum of sound, each instrument offering texture, rhythm, and resonance that shaped mood and social interaction. Music was intertwined with both labor and play. Field workers might hum or tap rhythms while harvesting grain. Craftsmen might whistle or drum to maintain pace, and children would mimic melodies with miniature instruments, learning both skill and social coordination simultaneously. Dance accompanied music naturally, ranging from informal, spontaneous movements in homes or courtyards to structured performances during festivals, religious ceremonies, or public gatherings. Movement expressed joy, worship, and storytelling, turning bodies into extensions of rhythm and narrative. Even labor incorporated dance-like elements, the swinging of arms, the lifting of tools, and the bending and reaching of repetitive tasks created a subtle choreography that connected physical effort with rhythm and timing. Storytelling was another vital component of leisure and entertainment. In the evenings, families and communities gathered to hear tales of gods, kings, spirits, and heroic ancestors. Stories were rich, layered, and immersive, serving multiple purposes simultaneously: amusement, moral instruction, historical preservation, and spiritual education. Through narrative, young listeners internalized lessons about courage, loyalty, social norms, and divine justice, while adults were reminded of tradition, ethics, and cultural identity. Festivals provided the most expansive arenas for entertainment. National or local celebrations might honor deities, commemorate seasonal changes, or celebrate harvests, blending music, dance, feasting, and dramatic performances into elaborate spectacles. Processions along the Nile featured musicians, dancers, priests, and participants carrying symbols of divine presence. Audiences of all ages and social standings experienced communal joy, ritualistic participation, and reinforcement of societal hierarchies. Learning through observation, imitation, and shared emotion. Games were another form of leisure that combined recreation, social interaction, and strategic thinking. Board games, such as Senet, were popular across classes, played on clay or wooden boards with carved pieces. The gameplay involved strategy, chance, and the projection of fate, sometimes interpreted as reflecting moral or spiritual lessons. Children, too, engaged in games that mimicked adult activities, such as tending miniature herds, managing pretend markets, or simulating ritual ceremonies, blending play with observation and practical learning. The sensory environment of leisure was vibrant. The sound of drums and flutes mingled with laughter and conversation. The warm glow of the sun or lamp illuminated dancing bodies and colorful clothing, and the tactile engagement of games, crafts, and music reinforced learning and skill. Even small, quiet moments, listening to the river's flow, observing birds, or crafting small toys offered relaxation, creativity, and connection to the environment, subtly teaching patience, observation, and aesthetic appreciation. Storytelling, music, and dance were not purely domestic or entertainment activities. They also reinforced spiritual life. Hymns sung to gods, chants accompanying offerings, and ritual dances performed during temple ceremonies created a seamless bridge between enjoyment and devotion. Through this integration, leisure activities were never isolated from the broader framework of survival, morality, and social cohesion, reflecting a worldview in which joy, play, and creativity were as essential as food, labor, and worship. Artisans, musicians, and performers held special roles in sustaining these cultural expressions. Skilled musicians and dancers were sometimes employed by temples, noble households, or civic authorities to provide entertainment and ritual accompaniment, creating livelihoods and reinforcing social hierarchies. Their performances carried prestige and responsibility. They were entertainers, educators, and intermediaries in the spiritual and social life of the community. Even in everyday leisure, improvisation and creativity flourished. Families might gather to sing, dance, and craft together, inventing new melodies, rhythmic patterns, or stories that reflected local events, personal experiences, or imaginative reinterpretations of myth. Such creativity allowed individuals to express identity, humor, and emotion, while simultaneously preserving cultural forms and passing them down to the next generation. Alcoholic beverages, particularly beer and occasionally wine, were often part of leisure and entertainment, especially during festivals, feasts, or social gatherings. These drinks were produced in households or communal spaces and consumed in moderation, providing relaxation, facilitating conversation, and reinforcing communal bonds. Eating, drinking, music, dance, and storytelling together formed a holistic sensory experience that nurtured the mind, body, and spirit. Observing leisure in ancient Egypt reveals a society that valued balance. Work, ritual, and survival were necessary, but music, games, dance, and storytelling sustained the human need for connection, pleasure, and creativity. Even small villages experienced this interplay. Neighbors might gather in the evening for shared songs, children played with handmade toys, and families crafted and enjoyed games or musical instruments, all creating subtle patterns of joy and education embedded in everyday life. In essence, entertainment, music, and leisure were not separate from the demands of existence. They were integral to health, social cohesion, education, and cultural continuity. These activities strengthened families, reinforced hierarchies, cultivated skills, expressed spiritual devotion, and allowed imagination and joy to flourish alongside labor and survival. Through music, dance, games, and stories, Egyptians experienced life more fully, connecting with one another, their environment, and the divine. By nightfall, when courtyards were quiet, lamps flickered, and the hum of the Nile receded into the distance, the echoes of songs, laughter, and rhythmic play lingered in memory, marking time, teaching lessons and sustaining cultural continuity, ensuring that life along the Nile was not only endured, but felt expressed and celebrated in myriad forms that continue to fascinate and inspire millennia later. Death in ancient Egypt was not seen as an ending, but as a transformation, a continuation of life in another realm. And this belief shaped every action, ritual, and artifact associated with the end of life. From the moment a person was born, preparation for death and the afterlife was subtly woven into daily life. Through gestures of piety, offerings to gods, and participation in rituals that reinforced the understanding that life was both fragile and sacred. Families, communities, and state institutions devoted considerable energy to burial practices, reflecting both social hierarchy and spiritual conviction. The physical process of death, when it occurred, immediately activated a series of carefully prescribed steps. Relatives, neighbors, and specialized workers attended to the body, washing, anointing, and wrapping it with linen, sometimes using oils and resins to preserve skin and hair. The goal was to protect the body, which was considered the vessel through which the soul would journey into eternity. For the wealthy, mummification was a precise, painstaking process carried out by skilled embalmers who removed internal organs, treated the body with salts, and carefully wrapped it in layers of linen. Each stage was accompanied by prayers, ritual gestures, and magical spells intended to safeguard the deceased from harm and ensure successful passage into the afterlife. Even in modest households, elements of these practices were present. The dead were washed, dressed, and respectfully placed within a simple coffin or wooden box, accompanied by personal items, food, and symbolic objects to support the journey beyond. Funerary rituals were elaborate social and spiritual events. Mourners gathered, often wailing and lamenting, performing ceremonies that expressed grief, respect, and hope. Priests recited sacred texts, invoked protective deities, and performed symbolic acts that mirrored the cosmology of Egyptian belief. Music, Incense and gestures created a ritual atmosphere in which the living and the dead were connected, and the boundaries between the earthly and spiritual realms were navigated with care and precision. Tombs were constructed with varying levels of complexity, depending on wealth, status, and local customs. From simple mud brick graves to intricate rock-cut chambers and monumental pyramids, tombs were designed to house the body, protect it, and provide a sacred space for offerings and remembrance. Walls were often decorated with paintings and inscriptions depicting daily life, rituals, gods, and symbolic journeys, creating a visual map for the deceased's journey into eternity and offering guidance, protection, and comfort. Funerary goods were chosen with intention. Tools, vessels, jewelry, clothing, food, and amulets were included to sustain the individual in the afterlife, ensuring that they could continue to live, work, and enjoy pleasures as they had in the mortal world. Every object was a deliberate choice, reflecting not only personal preference but also beliefs about utility, protection, and social identity in the next life. The soul, or ka, was believed to continue existing beyond death, requiring a preserved body as a focal point for recognition and sustenance. Offerings of bread, beer, water, and incense were made at tombs or household shrines, reinforcing the ongoing connection between living and deceased. These offerings were not symbolic alone. They were a tangible expression of respect, care, and interdependence, linking family members across the boundary of life and death. Religious texts, such as the Book of the Dead, provided instructions and spells to navigate the afterlife, offering guidance, protection, and assurances against obstacles. These writings were recited by priests, inscribed on tomb walls, or placed with the deceased, serving as both practical and spiritual tools for survival in the realm beyond. Beliefs about judgment and moral conduct permeated daily life. The Egyptians understood that actions, piety, and adherence to the principle of truth, balance, and order would influence the journey after death. Ethical and ritual behavior, therefore, was inseparable from preparation for the afterlife, creating a society in which moral, social, and spiritual norms were reinforced continuously. Funerary festivals and commemorations extended the cycle of death into community life. Anniversaries of death, public offerings, and seasonal rituals allowed the living to honor ancestors, maintain social cohesion, and renew spiritual bonds. Through these practices, death was transformed from a private, sorrowful event into a collective engagement with memory, legacy, and hope. Even children, while young, were taught to understand death and the rituals surrounding it. Participation in offerings, observation of funerals, and listening to stories of gods and ancestors instilled both reverence and continuity, ensuring that each generation inherited not only practical knowledge but the spiritual frameworks that sustained society. In essence, the treatment of death, burial, and the afterlife in ancient Egypt was a comprehensive system connecting the body, soul, family, community, and cosmos. Every step from washing and anointing to mummification, tomb construction, offerings, and ritual observances was imbued with meaning, reflecting a civilization's profound understanding of mortality, memory, and the human desire for continuity. Life was measured not only by survival and labor, but also by preparation for the eternal, creating an enduring cultural rhythm in which the living honored the dead, the present acknowledged the future, and every action was linked to the vast unseen landscape of divine and spiritual reality. Through these practices, Egyptians navigated the fragile boundary between life and death, ensuring that their society beliefs and human connections persisted across time, leaving behind not just physical monuments, but a legacy of understanding, care, and intricate devotion that continues to captivate us today. As the sun sets over the timeless Nile, it illuminates not just the mud brick villages and grand pyramids, but the invisible threads that wove together the daily lives of countless Egyptians across millennia. Daily existence in ancient Egypt was deceptively simple on the surface. Rising early, laboring in fields, weaving baskets, tending flocks, cooking bread, and engaging in family, religious, and social routines. Yet beneath this apparent ordinariness lay a deeply structured, interconnected world, a society in which every gesture, habit, and relationship carried meaning, reflecting an intricate understanding of survival, culture, spirituality, and human aspiration. The legacy of these routines persists in the details, reminding us that history is not only the story of kings, battles, or monumental architecture, but also the lived experience of ordinary people, their struggles, joys, and quiet genius. One enduring legacy is the remarkable adaptability of Egyptian society to its environment. The Nile was not merely a river, it was the lifeblood of survival, education, labor, and spiritual belief. Egyptians mastered irrigation, planting, and harvest cycles, transforming unpredictable natural rhythms into structured, productive patterns. Their methods were practical, often empirical, yet informed by centuries of observation and trial, demonstrating a profound understanding of ecology, weather, and agriculture. Children learned these rhythms as part of everyday life, observing, imitating, and participating in tasks that seemed mundane but were essential to community continuity. The cultivation of crops, management of livestock, and construction of homes were all forms of applied knowledge, transmitted through daily routines, observation, and hands-on learning rather than formal instruction for most of the population. This practical wisdom, passed through generations, left a legacy of sustainability, ingenuity, and respect for the environment, reminding us that human survival has always depended on understanding, adapting to, and cooperating with natural systems. Equally significant was the Egyptian integration of work, play, and learning. Childhood was never separate from adult life. Play, observation, and imitation served as training for future responsibilities. Games imitated markets, labor, and ritual, providing social education alongside entertainment. Music, dance, and storytelling cultivated creativity, social cohesion, and spiritual understanding. Adults, meanwhile, used similar techniques to teach apprentices, train family members, and embed cultural and ethical norms. The interplay of labor and leisure produced not only skill and efficiency, but also resilience, emotional intelligence, and social stability. This blending of utility and expression illustrates a society that understood the value of holistic development. Mind, body, and spirit nurtured simultaneously through experience, ritual, and engagement with community. Religious practice was another cornerstone of Egyptian daily life, with a lasting legacy. Religion permeated every action from washing and offering at home shrines to participation in temple ceremonies and national festivals. Egyptians did not compartmentalize faith. They understood it as inseparable from morality, labor, family, and health. Rituals were integrated into agriculture, social hierarchy, and personal hygiene, embedding spiritual awareness into routines. Protective amulets, prayers, and offerings reinforced a worldview in which the living and the divine coexisted in continuous dialogue, influencing both behavior and societal order. This enduring integration of spirituality into everyday life shaped not only moral and ethical frameworks, but also provided psychological resilience, a sense of purpose, and cultural continuity that allowed communities to thrive amid environmental and political challenges. Personal appearance, clothing, and adornment also left a tangible legacy, demonstrating the human need to express identity, social status, and cultural belonging. Linen garments, jewelry, hairstyles, and cosmetics were more than aesthetic choices. They were communication tools, reflecting wealth, occupation, regional identity, and spiritual alignment. The careful attention to grooming, adornment, and symbolic dress codified social norms and reinforced ethical and cultural behaviors. The aesthetics of daily life, beautifully crafted clothing, intricately designed jewelry, and ceremonial wigs illustrate the Egyptians' sophisticated understanding of human psychology. appearance shaped perception, influence, and social cohesion, creating a society in which subtlety, order, and beauty were inseparable from function. Health and medicine provide another lens into daily life's enduring significance. Egyptians developed complex systems of hygiene, herbal remedies, and preventative practices that were deeply intertwined with spiritual beliefs. Daily washing, the use of oils, poultices, and natural antiseptics, as well as rituals to ward off disease, reveal a civilization that approached the body with care, observation, and pragmatism. Midwives, healers, and household caregivers transmitted knowledge orally and practically, embedding lessons in routine life that prepared each generation to preserve health, manage injury, and survive environmental challenges. Their practices may seem rudimentary to modern eyes, yet many were remarkably effective, showing an empirical understanding of physiology and hygiene combined with spiritual and cultural reinforcement. Social life and communal rituals created continuity and cohesion, a legacy that extended far beyond individual households. Festivals, markets, music, dance, and storytelling were not mere diversions. They reinforced norms, educated youth, and maintained collective memory. The celebration of seasonal events, religious feasts, or personal milestones allowed communities to engage emotionally and socially, creating a shared identity and transmitting values from one generation to the next. Leisure, entertainment, and creative expression were not optional extras. They were embedded in survival, social order, and spiritual practice, teaching practical skills, emotional intelligence, and cultural literacy in ways both subtle and profound. Even children participated in these networks of learning, play, and observation, ensuring that every generation absorbed not only survival skills but cultural memory, moral frameworks, and social intelligence. Death, burial, and the afterlife form the final link in the legacy of daily life. Egyptians approached mortality with preparation, ritual, and reverence, embedding the journey beyond death into everyday life. From the earliest gestures of piety, protective amulets, and moral teaching to the careful construction of tombs, mummification, and offerings, life and death were intertwined. The meticulous attention to continuity, memory, and preparation for eternity ensured that the values, practices, and knowledge of the living persisted, linking generations across time. The physical and spiritual infrastructure created by these practices, tombs, temples, ritual texts, amulets, served as repositories of culture, ethics, and technical skill, offering a legacy of resilience, ingenuity, and reverence that continues to fascinate and inspire the modern imagination. Daily life in ancient Egypt was, therefore, far richer than simple routines suggest. The rhythm of work, the integration of learning and play, the blend of practicality with aesthetic expression, and the seamless inclusion of spiritual practice created a society in which humans were constantly engaged with survival, morality, community, and the divine. Every household, child, artisan, priest, and laborer contributed to a vast, interconnected cultural ecosystem that valued observation, skill, creativity, and devotion. Observing their lives teaches us about human adaptability, the integration of multiple domains into cohesive experience, and the importance of continuity, both practical and spiritual, across generations. Perhaps the most enduring lesson is that civilization is built not only on monumental architecture or recorded history, but on the quiet, persistent rhythms of daily life. The tasks of cooking bread, weaving linen, caring for children, offering prayers, telling stories, making music, or observing rituals may appear mundane individually, yet together they sustain culture, transmit knowledge, reinforce identity, and create social cohesion. The Egyptians understood that survival required more than food or shelter. It required order, creativity, discipline, care, and connection. Their legacy reminds us that every human gesture, no matter how small, is part of a vast web of influence that carries forward values, skills, and identity across time. Even today, the world feels their imprint. Modern agriculture, medicine, art, music, and spirituality echo ancient techniques, insights, and sensibilities. Linen weaving, beer brewing, herbal remedies, funerary practices, and ritualized observances all carry vestiges of Egyptian innovation and daily wisdom. But beyond material influence, the Egyptians teach a subtler lesson: that human life is sustained not only through survival, but through the meaningful integration of work, play, community, ritual, and reflection. The continuity of culture, knowledge, and memory is built, day by day, hour by hour, task by task, as we imagine the sun rising and setting over the Nile, illuminating children playing, women weaving, men harvesting, and priests chanting. We see a society that understood the profound significance of daily acts. Each loaf of bread, each child's game, each prayer or offering, each song or dance, contributed to a civilization capable of enduring for millennia. The legacy of ancient Egypt is not confined to pyramids or tombs. It lives in the human capacity to find order, joy, beauty, and meaning in the routines of everyday life, in the ability to teach, create, and care, and in the understanding that every small gesture is part of a larger, enduring story of humanity. As we draw the curtains on our journey along the timeless banks of the Nile, we leave behind the bustling villages, the sacred temples, the laughter of children, the songs of workers, and the quiet devotion of families. We have glimpsed the rhythms, struggles, and joys of daily life in ancient Egypt, and felt how every small actwork, play, prayer, and care was woven into a tapestry of survival, culture, and connection. Though centuries separate us from those who once walked these lands, their routines, wisdom, and humanity continue to whisper through the sands, inviting us to remember that life, in every age, is built from countless small moments, stitched together with care, creativity, and devotion. So, traveler, as the sun sets and the stars begin to shine over the eternal Nile, rest your mind and let these stories drift with you into dreams. Good night, traveler. Until we meet again.